needs to give up on the Tensor chip. Hear me out. So the Tensor chip, when it first came out, everybody had a lot of high hopes for it because, of course, Google designing their own chip, working with Samsung, there were a lot of positives that we thought we were going to get, talking about being able to handle all the complex AI, machine learning, large language models, all these things, all the stuff that Google broadcasted and talked about the benefits and what it was going to be able to do for the platform. So we made certain allotments, like we had some allowances because we knew it wasn't the fastest. We knew it wasn't the best. We knew it wasn't the most amazing chip ever, but it was custom designed, made with Google, working with Samsung, tensor processing unit, all these great things to be able to handle and do all the complex AI and machine learning that Google was supposed to do. And that lasted for a few months until the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 came out and blew it out of the water in basically every metric. And I was still supporting it. I was sitting there thinking, okay, well, just because the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 can handle all these more complex calculations as a chip, it doesn't mean that Samsung has the complex AI. It doesn't mean they have all this background in programming for machine learning and AI to take advantage of the chipset. So my thought process was, yes, the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 probably is better, but Google has their own AI models. They have their own language models. They have all these things that they've been building and working on for years that supposedly the Tensor could do. And then you start seeing all the problems, all the holes in the armor, and we end up with things like a couple of weeks ago where we find out the Pixel 8 can't even run the Gemini Nano AI, which is the first ever on-device AI model from Google. It had hardware limitations, which likely is because of the RAM. But here's the other thing. The Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 can do it. So there's this symbiotic relationship between the chips and the RAM and all the stuff that's being run on them that it needs these resources to do it. Well, very clearly, the S24 with 8 gigs of RAM with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 can run it. It can do Gemini Nano AI, no problem. But then you have the Tensor G3 and the Pixel 8, and it can't. Even though the Pixel 8 Pro can, it's the same chip. So you're thinking, okay, if it has the same chip, the Pixel 8 Pro and the Pixel 8 should be able to handle the same things. But from my understanding and based off of how a lot of this stuff works, you need that extra RAM space to be able to run these calculations and to basically use these large language models, use these AI models, and get the results that you're trying to get. So yeah, the Tensor can't do it. And it's not going to get any better. We're going to get the Tensor G4 that comes out later this year, but it's still with Samsung. We're still a year away from being able to see what a Google and TSMC chip can do. And that's our last best great hope. And everybody's been hoping for this for the longest time. A lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about Samsung. I think it's perfectly fine. I haven't been too worried about Samsung. And in fact, I think that the Tensor G3 on pretty much every basis works well. Most people that have the phones enjoy them. They are not really lacking in any area other than mainly when it comes to like the high performance stuff like playing high-end video games and stuff like that. But again, that's not really the purpose of the Pixel phone. But you would think at $999 with the Pixel 8 Pro, it should be able to keep up in most areas. But as many people have pointed out for a long time, the benchmarks of the Tensor G3 are about the same as a Snapdragon 8 Generation 1, just slightly better, and it has more capabilities for AI and machine learning with the GPU, a tensor processing unit, and all that stuff. So they need to give up. And this was made abundantly aware once we saw that the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 could do these things. But here's the other thing. When you take a look at Samsung and the AI stuff that they've got, the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 can run these AI things. And we just got that update the other day from Samsung, which pushed out a lot of these AI features to the S23 series, the Z Flip 5, Z Fold 5, and the Tab S9 devices. So if a year old Snapdragon 8 Generation 2 can run it just fine, if the Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 can run it even better, and we're having problems with the Tensor G3 being able to run stuff that Samsung can run, but it's made by Google. So Samsung has licensed out a lot of these smart AI features and all these cool things. They've rebranded them, give them different names. But if the Snapdragon, with no customization whatsoever, with no unique relationship on custom building this chip between Samsung and Google, if Samsung can do it with just a regular Snapdragon 8 Generation 3, that means if you plug a Snapdragon 8 Generation 3 into a Pixel 8, it should run it marvelously. I mean, it's got the same RAM as the S24. It's got 8 GB of RAM. If you had the same chip, you wouldn't have these hardware limitations. So, what's the point of investing the time, the marketing, the research, and going through all these extra steps to create your own chip if your own chip is inferior to the flagship chip that Snapdragon is making on its own? I mean, that right there says put the white flag up. Now, it may get better next year when it comes to the TSMC chip that they're going to make. So maybe the Pixel 10 will get better. Maybe the G5 and the Pixel 10 will be a better chip. But from what I'm seeing and all the preliminary stuff we've seen on the Tensor G4, it's not even supposed to be that much better than the Tensor G3. So we're going to have a whole nother year of sitting there wondering, how good is this? How well will it work? Can Google even run their own language and AI models and machine learning on their own chip that's supposed to be designed to do this? That was the whole point. The whole point of making the Tensor G3 is so Google could customize it to run all of their stuff and to run it better than everybody else. And then you have this Snapdragon chip from Qualcomm that runs it better. And a lot of people have been saying the Tensor needs to go. A lot of people don't like the Tensor. I've had a lot of faith in the Tensor. And I think by and large, the Tensor held up really well for most things, for the price point and what Google was trying to accomplish, until it was painfully obvious that it can't keep up in the area that it's supposed to be dominant. And even when I saw a lot of the benchmarks, I'm like, okay, well, Google has their own proprietary language models. They have their own proprietary AI stuff that they've been working on. If you look at Apple and the way they do things, they design their hardware and their software. It's such a much better experience than when you look at trying to fit Android in different phones onto just Android, because it's not tailored for that chip. It's tailored for Android. It's not specifically designed and fine tuned on every chip to exploit all the best things you can get in Android. So I was thinking, all right, if Google, who makes Android and who has all these complex AI models and is doing all this crazy stuff with computational photography, machine learning, all these other things, if like they should be able to do the same thing. Like Google should be able to say, okay, Pixel 8, I'm going to give you this special chip that's programmed and made specifically to run on our operating system, and you're going to get the best experience. And it's just not. I mean, it's fine as far as a smartphone goes. And I think most people think, especially even with the Pixel 8, that you get value for the money. It's a 3 gigahertz chip. It's very capable of doing a lot of things. There are obvious things that it can do, like the extra security enhancements. Because of the chip working with Android in the phone, you can use facial scanning with your banking apps. You can't do that with other Android phones. That's exclusive to the Pixel 8s. So you've got that. You've got their great computational photography. But then the whole other thing is it's not really doing a lot of AI stuff on the chip. It's handing a lot of it off to the server. We've seen that with some of the different features they advertise. And the whole thought process was, okay, we should be able to run these on the device. Like we should be able to run these AI things on the device because of the customization and the power of the Tensor in the AI and the machine learning department and all that cool stuff it can do. And then you find it sending most of its stuff to the server. So if it's sending most of the stuff to the server and it can't run its own AI models because of hardware limitations, and it can't, I mean, the Snapdragon can do it just as well. Why are you going through all these steps? Why are you creating this chip that, when you look at benchmarks, when you look at performance, is clearly inferior? So I've been fine with it. I've been okay with it until we see that it clearly can't do what it's designed to do. And the chips that aren't designed to do it can do it. I mean, it was made abundantly clear even with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 2. And there were a lot of questions out there because there really hasn't been a standardized way of testing AI benchmarks. Like you can do standard benchmarks, you can do your synthetic benchmarks, but there's not a standard to test how well AI stuff actually runs on a chip. So even then I was like, okay, well, there's no standard for this, and you can't test them because they're not exactly the same chip under the same circumstances. And Google should have a leg up because Google has made these AI things. They've made their language models. They've made their AI models. They've made all these AI features. So they should theoretically run better on the Tensor, and they don't. So yeah, Google needs to give up on the Tensor. As of right now, I mean, we're going to get the Tensor 4. I would really, at this point, like to see Google cancel whatever contract and plans they have with TSMC and just get a dump truck full of money, go to Qualcomm, say, I'm sorry, and ask them for the Snapdragon 8 Generation 4. That would be better. I mean, we see it right now, even with the Pixel Fold, with the Google the Tensor 2. it's not even nearly as capable as a Tensor 3. I mean, we're just now finally getting circle to search on the Pixel Fold, but the Pixel Fold at $1,800 can't do this stuff. It's not getting access to these things. So it's like 1 year later, look at how dated this hardware and this architecture is. And it's like the Pixel 8 is supposed to be supported for 7 years. So if the Tensor 2 is already holding up very poorly a year later, the Tensor G3 is already performing poorly at its own things it was designed for just 6 months afterward. What does the landscape look like for the next 6.5 years? So I really think that Google needs to go back to the drawing board, and they need to get Qualcomm to give them the Snapdragon chips. They need to pay the money. But then here's the other problem. I'm sure they've been saving some money trying to use these Samsung chips, or having Samsung design and build this chip at their foundry, which is the Tensor. I'm sure they got to be saving some money that way. They probably have to pay a lot of money to use a Qualcomm chip, and they've probably been trying to bypass that and make their own thing, like their own homebrew, homemade chip. Well, that'll probably increase the price of the phones. So then it's like, okay, if they have to pay more money and it's going to cost more money, how much is the price going to go up on a Pixel 9 or a Pixel 10? Like, if Google were to go all in with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 4 or 5, by the time we get around to the Pixel 10, how much more is that going to cost? And then, okay, if we go up to $1,000, is somebody going to buy a Pixel 10 Pro for the same price they would get an S24 or an S24 Ultra, or S25 Ultra, whatever we have at that point? So there's a lot of problems here that have been created by this half-baked measure of them trying to come up with their own chip that just isn't living up to expectations. Is very obvious. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to talk about this video. So I'm sure some people will be angry with me. I'm sure some people will be like, hey, he's hating on Google again. I'm not. I'm just looking at the obvious. I think it's a failed experiment. I think when you take a look at what the other chips are capable of, what we get, what the end result is, where things are going with their AI models. I mean, shoot, they're licensing out AI to Samsung. They're licensing out AI, like the same stuff looks like it's going to be going to the iPhone. That'll probably get announced with iOS 18 in June with the WWDC event. So what kind of special reason is there? I mean, for the longest time, I said the two reasons to buy a Pixel were the camera and for the stock experience with Android with the updates. The third one was going to be AI, but now they've given AI to everyone, and everybody's running their AI probably better than Google is without having a Tensor chip. So, yeah, I think it's time to shut the light switch off in the development plant at the Tensor place, and they need to get a Snapdragon chip. So that's all I got in this video. Not hating on them. I am an advocate for consumers. I'm not a brand advocate. I'm an advocate for people to get the best that they can for their money, get the phone that they want that lines up with what they need. And I evaluate all these brands. And I've been a big fan, a big supporter for Google for the longest time. I still am. And I will continue to be. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to sit here and analyze this and say, clearly there are issues here. Clearly this experiment isn't working out the way that it's supposed to. And they need to fix it to try and make things better before it becomes catastrophic. So that's all I got. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and the subscribe button and little notification bell if you want updates when new videos come out. And as always, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys next time.